You are reading this because a specific frequency within you has been activated. You are not here by accident. You are here because an internal mechanism has begun to vibrate. This is not the trembling of fear, though the ego may interpret it as such. It is the trembling of recognition. A threshold is opening before you. You perceive it with the same ancient, instinctual certainty that an old oak feels when the atmospheric pressure drops long before the first snow falls. You are detecting a shift in the seasons of your life before the air has physically turned cold. There is a movement occurring in the tectonic plates of your unconscious mind. It is a slow, subterranean rearrangement of your foundational self. Although you cannot yet articulate its precise name, you possess a gnawing knowledge that this shift concerns the total transformation of your reality. I am not addressing your intellect or your rational mind. I am speaking directly to the strata beneath your logic, the place where symbols breathe, where dreams utilize a silent grammar that predates language itself. It is here, in the secret, dimly lit corridors of your psyche, that the approaching year is already unfolding. 2026 is not merely a calendar year of random events. It is a year of absolute necessity. It is a chronological mandate. It compels the empath, someone of your specific constitution, to confront two opposing forces, the truth of who you have been and the undeniable reality of who you can no longer afford to remain. For decades, you have existed in servitude to the emotional climates of others. You have fine-tuned your nervous system to detect the microscopic shifts in another person's tone. You have catalogued the unspoken tension tightening behind their eyes and mapped the subterranean turbulence of their unhealed wounds. You felt these external disturbances as if they were generating within your own body. In doing so, you operated under the false belief that you were fulfilling a noble, unspoken duty. This is the trap of the sensitive. Many empaths disintegrate inside a psychic atmosphere where their inner voice is strangled by the relentless demands of the environment. You managed troubled parents. You stabilized wounded partners. You navigated chaotic ecosystems that hinged entirely on your capacity to absorb more toxicity than any single human organism should endure. Your sensitivity was not a luxury, it was a survival strategy. You adapted. You contorted your personality. You anticipated danger. You softened your footfalls to avoid triggering explosions. But the unconscious mind is not fooled by these adaptations. It creates a ledger. It remembers every compromise you made, every truth you swallowed, and every instance where your soul attempted to speak but was suffocated by your need to survive. These forgotten moments do not vanish. They descend. They accumulate in the shadow, waiting for the precise moment when you possess the structural integrity to face their returning tide. That tide is rising now. The very fact that you are aware of this pressure indicates that your psyche has determined you are ready. Transformation is never initiated by the desires of the ego. It is initiated when the deeper self determines that stasis is no longer endurable. It forces a shift. It shatters the calcified shell of your old identity so that a sovereign version of you may emerge. The empath resists this breaking point more than anyone else because your entire identity has been woven around keeping the peace, holding the emotional fabric of a family or group together, and preventing the collapse of those around you. But the question remains, what happens when the one collapsing is you? What happens when the sheer tonnage of what you have carried begins to fracture the architectural integrity of your own being? The unconscious does not respond to this crisis with pity. It responds with clinical precision. It sends symbols. It deploys dreams. It orchestrates disturbances that cannot be controlled, predicted, or rationalized away. In recent months, your dreamscape has likely turned darker, more symbolic, and increasingly urgent. You may have found yourself wandering through vast, labyrinthine halls of mirrors where the reflections no longer synchronize with your physical movements. This is the archetypal dream of the empath whose identity is dissolving. For years, you have mirrored others so effectively, becoming exactly who they needed you to be, that your own reflection has become distorted. The unconscious is demanding a correction of the image. It is demonstrating that the persona you have used to navigate the world is void. If you listen with focused attention during these dream states, you may hear the faint, rhythmic breathing of a figure standing behind the mirror. This is the older, stronger, sovereign version of you. It is the self calling out to the persona. Other dreams may manifest as water rising, flood submerging childhood homes, ocean swallowing familiar landscapes. These waters represent the depth of your unexpressed emotional life returning to reclaim the territory you abandoned. This is not destruction, it is purification. In the symbolic language of the psyche, water always signifies both dissolution and renewal. When it appears in such overwhelming magnitude, It indicates that the deepest sectors of your unconscious are preparing to wash away everything that does not belong in your future. If you resist the current, the water rises until you drown. If you surrender, it teaches you to breathe in dimensions you did not know existed. The empath's journey often features the recurring motif of the wounded animal: a wolf limping through the snow, a bird with a shattered wing, a horse refusing to move despite a clear path. Do not dismiss these images as random neural firing. They are fragments of your intuitive nature that you have starved. The empath's wound is rarely visible on the surface. It hides in your relentless capacity to feel for others while abandoning yourself. The wounded animal is the instinct you forgot you possessed. It limps because you have refused to acknowledge its pain. 2026 will not permit this neglect to continue. When instinct is ignored for too long, it becomes autonomous. It seizes control of the host. It erupts in sudden clarity, enforces sudden boundaries, and orchestrates abrupt endings. Many empaths fear this moment because the behavior feels alien to them. It feels cold, decisive, and ruthless. You must understand, this is not ruthlessness. It is restoration. It is the psyche aggressively reclaiming the ground that was sacrificed to appease others. I speak to you now with absolute clarity. You are approaching a psychological threshold that cannot be bypassed. You cannot appease your way around it. You cannot soften the blow with kindness or delay the impact with patience. Individuation demands the death of the false self. For the empath, the false self is constructed entirely from other people's expectations, projections, and wounds. You have worn these projections like heavy garments that were never tailored for your body. You shaped your life around the emotional gravity of others. The self tolerates this distortion only for a specific duration before it intervenes. Transformation begins the instant you realize you can no longer carry what was never yours. There is a pervasive misunderstanding regarding the nature of transformation. The collective imagination views it as a radiant awakening, a gentle blossoming into wisdom. This is a fallacy. True transformation is violent and disruptive. It begins as a psychic earthquake. The unconscious shakes the foundations of your constructed identity so that the fissures reveal what lies beneath. This is not cruelty, it is necessity. If the empath does not confront the truth of their own shadow, they remain trapped in the roles assigned to them by external forces. They remain what their childhood demanded, what their partners required, what society applauded. They become a reflection, never a person. The approaching year carries a specific energetic signature, one that sensitives will feel as a command to reclaim power. Power, for the empath, is not dominance over others. It is sovereignty over one's inner world. It is the capacity to issue a refusal without guilt. It is the ability to withdraw without explanation. It is the choice to prioritize oneself without collapsing into a shame spiral. This caliber of power emerges only when the unconscious has integrated enough shadow material to withstand the heavy weight of autonomy. You may already be noticing the precursors of this shift. Conversations that once drained you now provoke a cold, inner firmness. Situations that once triggered an emotional spiral now reveal their manipulative patterns with clinical clarity. People who once intimidated you now appear transparent and small. This is the inevitable result of the unconscious illuminating what was previously hidden. You are not becoming harsh. You are becoming awake. Nothing is more threatening to those who depend on your unconscious compliance than your sudden, conscious clarity. As the year unfolds, you will experience an unmistakable knowing that something in your life must terminate. It may not be a relationship, though that is common. It may not be a career, though that too may fall away. What must end is the psychic contract you unconsciously signed decades ago, the agreement to carry the emotional burdens of the tribe. Breaking this contract feels like betrayal, but it is, in reality, an act of liberation. Your life was never intended to be lived beneath the crushing weight of unspoken expectations. You were not born to absorb the pain of others until your own soul became unrecognizable. I have observed this specific pattern in countless subjects over decades of analysis. The empath enters the world carrying an unusual sensitivity, not as a flaw, but as a navigational compass for the soul. However, without boundaries, this sensitivity becomes a snare. It lures you into the archetypes of the healer, the mediator, the rescuer. But you must understand that rescuing is often an inversion of true empathy. It is the ego's attempt to justify its existence through utility. The self does not require you to be useful. It requires you to be whole. Wholeness cannot emerge while you inhabit the emotional structures of your past. It is often in midlife, though the timing is unique to each soul, that the unconscious becomes impatient. It presses forward. It refuses to allow the obsolete patterns to persist. It is as if the deeper intelligence within you whispers, "Enough. Enough of carrying. Enough of absorbing. Enough of shaping yourself around the distortions of others. The time has come to reclaim your own psychic territory." This reclamation is not an external political act. It is an internal revolution. It requires a confrontation with your own shadow. You must face the anger you never expressed, the grief you never mourned, and the rage that pulses beneath your silence. These emotions are not your enemies. They are sentinels. They are messengers from the depths. They appear when the psyche is ready to dismantle an outdated identity. Though it may frighten you to feel their intensity, do not turn away. The shadow rises not to destroy you, but to complete you. 2026 is an initiation. The empath is its primary subject. When you stand on the precipice of transformation, there is always a moment when the atmosphere feels strangely still, as though the fabric of existence is holding its breath. You have likely felt this uncanny quiet recently beneath the noise of daily routines. This quiet is not emptiness, it is the silence that precedes revelation. It is the threshold where the unconscious begins to move with velocity, rearranging the inner architecture of your psyche. Transformation rarely announces itself with a shout. It begins with subtle dissonance, a faint, nagging sense that the life you are living no longer matches the life that intends to emerge through you. For the empath, this dissonance is potent because your identity is so deeply entangled with the needs of others. Your early developmental years taught you, perhaps brutally, that survival depended on sensing danger before it arrived. You learned to soothe wounds you did not inflict. Sensitivity became your armor. But the unconscious is never content with a defensive posture. It tolerates adaptation only as long as necessary. When the deeper self determines that the compensatory patterns have outlived their utility, it initiates the dismantling process. This often feels like a collapse. It is, in fact, liberation disguised as disintegration. You will notice that people who once occupied central roles in your narrative now feel strangely distant. Their voices no longer anchor you. Their emotional demands no longer penetrate your defenses. It is as though an invisible veil has dropped between you and the past. This is not detachment born of coldness, it is detachment born of awakening. The psyche is withdrawing its energy from old loyalties and old contracts. Where energy withdraws, form dissolves. The empath must experience what represents the night sea journey, a descent into the dim, uncertain waters of the unconscious. This descent is not a punishment. It is a purification ritual. You are being stripped of illusions. You are being forced to look at what you became in order to survive. Though this truth is painful, it is the only doorway to sovereignty. Consider the recurring dream of wandering through a vast forest at dusk. You are unable to distinguish the path from the shadows. The trees loom like silent, ancient witnesses. You feel watched, though the observer is invisible. This forest is the symbol of the unknown self, the parts of you that remain unintegrated. The dusk represents the transition of consciousness, the fading of the old light. The feeling of being watched is the presence of the unconscious observing your movement toward individuation. This dream arises when the empath approaches a decisive rupture with their old roles. The forest demands that you walk without guidance, without rescuing anyone, and without shrinking yourself to fit the narrow paths carved by others. It demands you walk as an individual. There is another recurring symbol, the abandoned house. Its windows are shattered, floors buckling, rooms echoing with emptiness. This house is the psychic structure you built in childhood. It is the identity you constructed to accommodate the unpredictable moods of your caregivers. You may dream of wandering through this decay, touching peeling wallpaper, opening doors to rooms you do not recognize. This is not a dream about memory, it is a dream about release. The house is collapsing because you are no longer meant to inhabit it. It is a relic. When the unconscious presents this imagery, it signals that your old identity is structurally unsound and too small to contain the magnitude of who you are becoming. The self demands space to expand. The structures of the past must fall. As 2026 approaches, the empath will experience an intensification of these inner signals. You will feel an inexplicable urgency, a sense that an event is imminent. You will feel a quiet certainty that you can no longer tolerate what you once accepted. These are not mood swings. They are psychic indicators. They mark the shift from externally oriented sensitivity to internally anchored sovereignty. One of the most difficult aspects of this transition is the inevitable confrontation with your own anger. Empaths are conditioned to believe that anger is dangerous, destructive, or shameful. You fear it because you have witnessed the damage unrestrained rage caused in the lives of others. But you must distinguish between rage and integration. Anger, when integrated, is not destructive, it is protective. It marks the boundary between what nourishes you and what poisons you. If sadness reveals what has been lost, anger reveals what must no longer be permitted. The emergence of anger within the empath is the sign that the unconscious is reclaiming the instinctual power suppressed long ago. You will notice moments when your body tightens, your voice drops, and your patience evaporates. These are not moral failures. They are eruptions of authenticity. The shadow is speaking. It is saying, you have abandoned yourself long enough. You have been silent in the wrong places. You have been generous in the wrong directions. This ends now. Do not fear the shadow. Fear the consequences of ignoring it. The shadow that is ignored becomes compulsive and directs your life from behind the curtain. The shadow that is confronted becomes a source of vitality. It reveals the parts of your personality that were exiled to maintain harmony. As these parts return, you feel a new solidity, a sense of being anchored, less shaken by the storms of others. This anchoring is essential because the approaching transformation is profound. It asks you to step out of the psychic roles you inherited, roles that felt like destiny but were merely adaptations. You will discover you are no longer the healer of everyone's wounds. You are no longer the interpreter of unspoken emotions. You are no longer the container for chaos that does not belong to you. People who benefited from your self-abandonment will resist this. They may accuse you of being distant or unrecognizable. These reactions are validation that you are changing correctly. When you stop playing the assigned role, the audience will protest, not because you are wrong, but because they have lost the version of you that made their lives comfortable. You do not exist to make life easy for others. You exist to become whole. Wholeness requires the confrontation of inner opposites. The empath who has lived in perpetual sensitivity must learn firmness. The empath who has lived in service must learn boundaries. The empath who has absorbed chaos must learn psychological distance. This is the alchemical marriage within the psyche, the union of the soft and the strong, the receptive and the assertive. When these opposites join, a new personality forms, one guided by an inner authority that cannot be manipulated. Dreams during this phase become strikingly vivid. You may dream of standing before a great mountain, its peak obscured by clouds. You feel fear mixed with determination. The mountain is your destiny, the true path you avoided because it required confronting suppression. In the dream, you begin to ascend, aware that the climb will demand the dissolution of your old self. This signals readiness. The mountain only appears when the unconscious decides the ascent must begin. Other dreams will carry the motif of fire, houses burning, forests igniting, torches lighting hidden passages. Fire is the symbol of transformation through destruction. It consumes the unnecessary so the essential may remain. Many empaths fear the fire because it feels violent. But the fire is not punishing you, it is liberating you from the persona, the mask you wear to protect others from your intensity. When the persona falls, the true face emerges. At this point, relationships shift. The awakened empath becomes intolerant of energy drains. You will feel an instinctive withdrawal from those who once held influence over you. Connections may fade through a quiet recognition of misalignment. New connections may appear, individuals who resonate with your deeper truth and sense your growing power. These relationships will feel fated, arranged by the psyche to accompany you through the transition. As you move deeper, you will sense autonomy in a new way. Autonomy is not isolation, it is freedom from emotional fusion. It is the capacity to feel without losing yourself, to love without dissolving. It is the recognition that your worth is not tied to your utility. When this emerges, you will feel both acceleration and grief. Acceleration because you are finally becoming yourself, grief because you realize how long you lived as someone else. The unconscious allows no regression. Once transformation begins, the only direction is forward. Forward means depth. You are being asked to descend into the layers you avoided, to retrieve the fragments split off in childhood. You are reclaiming instinct, intuition, anger, desire, and power. These elements were never lost, they were exiled. Now they return like heirs to a kingdom. The empath who integrates these parts becomes a force of clarity. Their silence is powerful because it is anchored in truth. Their boundaries are firm because they align with the self. Their intuition is sharp because it is no longer clouded by the noise of others. 2026 is the year this new form crystallizes. You will no longer be shaped by the wounds of the past but by the architecture of your individuation. This architecture is stronger than anything built on self-sacrifice. You are not approaching a transformation, you are already inside it. There is a peculiar sensation accompanying the deep phases of this process. It is as though your psyche is rearranging itself behind your back, moving pieces of your inner world like a silent chess master playing a game you did not realize had started. You may wake with a feeling that something has shifted, though the external world remains unchanged. You feel it in the marrow. A heaviness has lifted, or perhaps a new, truthful weight has settled. This is the unconscious laying the groundwork for a revelation that cannot be postponed. The empath senses these movements acutely. Your internal antennae, usually tuned to others, are now turning inward. What you once interpreted as emotional volatility is revealing itself as deep perception. You are being asked to sense yourself. This shift is disorienting because your identity has always been relational. You understood yourself through the needs of others. When the unconscious reclaims that energy, a great emptiness appears.